Hi, folks. My name's Dave, and I write books. Important facts about me that you should know. I have written 3 novels, 2 short story collections, 4 television episodes, 2 plays, and 1 music video. I have spoken in nearly 700 schools, libraries, conventions, conferences, theatres, universities, and 1 pumpkin festival, presumably because my hair matched the fruit. I have won the Irish Young Adult Book of the Year award, been the last man standing at a literary death match, exactly as much fun as it sounds. I appear on RTE as a wildly enthusiastic creative writing teacher. I once did a stand-up comedy gig for every child in Malta for some reason. But most importantly, once won a limbo competition and a crisp taste testing competition on the same day at the same party. Do not ask me to repeat it on film because I'm 33 and my knees no longer work. Also, I once ate an entire Viennetta on my birthday when I was 6 and got so ill I had to go to hospital. Doctor gave me a lollipop though, which made me get sick again. But today I am here for a very special purpose. I am here to share with you what I know about writing. Because maybe some of you want to be writers. Maybe some of you dream of creating TV shows or books or films or games or anime or plays. Maybe some of you sit around with your mates dissecting the movies that you love and hating on the movies that you don't, talking about what you do differently or coming up with new endings to things because you didn't like the old ones, or drawing bosses and enemy types for video games that only exist in your head. Or maybe you don't do any of these things. Maybe you hate writing. Maybe stories just don't make sense to you, and when you hear your teacher ask you to write something, you would rather gargle barbed wire than come up with a story, much less have people read it. Maybe that dislike of writing extends to the books you have to read for school, and when the teacher talks about theme and tone and character and setting, she may as well be speaking ancient Greek. But whether you love or hate writing, you cannot get away from it. I don't just mean the stories that you will have to write for your exams or the personal statements you will have to write if you're applying for college or jobs or the books you will have to read and dissect for school. I mean, writing is essential to life because writing is communication. Have you ever gotten in trouble? No, clearly. And been pulled up on it by somebody. And you know what you want to say. You've got the justification for your actions lined up. You have a perfectly good reason for all of your choices. But when you try and talk, the words turn into wet spaghetti in your mouth. And you just can't get them to do what they're supposed to do. Or has someone ever insulted you and you thought of a really clever comeback except you thought of it 2 hours after you really needed it, and everyone's just gone home, and you're standing there crying. The French actually have a word for that. L'esprit d'escalier, the thought on the stairs. Every text you send, every Instagram post you put up, every TikTok, every comic, every long novel and short story, every politician's speech and solicitor defense, every argument you are ever going to have in your life, it all boils down to putting one word in front of the other and hoping people understand you. If you are good at being understood, it makes life a lot easier. And that brings us to this video. I teach a lot of writing classes, and it's just very clear to me that people don't really understand what writing is. I meet a lot of would-be writers who say, "Oh, you write books? Yeah, I could write a book. Sure, all you do is sit around in your pajamas making up stuff, right?" And I say, "No, sometimes I wear a hat." Shut up. The thing is, though, they're right. Writing is easy if you know how. So what I want to do in this video is give you a blueprint of how to get started in writing. If you're bet into the idea of being a writer, great. There's loads here for you. If you're not and just want the bare minimum to keep your teachers happy and examiners happy, then great. This is your step-by-step, lazy as hell, Lego block guide to putting together a story. Because if you know the basics, you can then build outwards from that. And that brings me to the first writing tip I want to give you. You know more than you think. Hands up who knows what the word juxtaposition means. Hands up who knows what a deus ex machina is. Hands up who's familiar with Joseph Campbell's theory of the monomyth and the 12 steps of the hero's journey. Now, putting aside the fact this is a pre-record and I have no idea if you put your hands up or not, I'm willing to guess a lot of you don't think you know what those things are. Except you do. You have been reading since you were 5. You have been watching films since you were 3. You have been playing video games since you were 6 and watching Attack on Titan since you were 12, and an older brother let you watch The Exorcist when your parents were away and you didn't sleep for a week. I watched The Exorcist on my own when I was 9 in an old rickety house, and I couldn't go upstairs for 2 days because I was like, she'll be on the stairs, she'll be on the stairs. And she was. Hello, Linda. But the point that I want to make before we start is that you are already an expert in stories. Or at the very least, you've seen a lot of movies and TV shows, and all you need to do is realize that they have been teaching you how to understand how stories work. For example, hands up, if you've ever seen a film where a young hero grows up somewhere lonely and neglected, then finds out they have something about them that makes them special before going off on an adventure. On that adventure, they meet experienced heroes who will train and mentor them, and a villain who threatens to destroy everything they hold dear. This villain might even have a personal connection to the hero, which makes them all the more dangerous. But in the end, after realizing something important about themselves, the hero rises up to destroy the villain and saves the world slash universe slash leash or whatever. Has anyone ever seen a film like that? Of course you have. That is Harry Potter and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Man of Steel and Captain America and Wonder Woman and Uncharted and Disney's Hercules, my personal favourite, and like 4 Spider-Man films. Once you start thinking about the stories you already know, you can use them to work out how to tell your own. All stories have a similar kind of structure, and if you know that structure, you can use it to tell your own stories. It can be the coat hanger you hang everything else on. Remember that as we go forward into section 1, plot. Writing secret number 2. If you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you know how to write a short story. If you watch The Simpsons, old Simpsons, obviously not the tottering corpse the show has become, you know how to write a plot. Any 30-minute sitcom teaches you the basics of how to set up a story. Definitions first. For anybody who doesn't know, the plot of your story is the events that happen one after another. Now, I don't just mean things happen. I mean that something happens, and that thing causes something else to happen, and that causes something else, like dominoes knocking each other over. John Wick is a nice, slightly sad man who gets a dog to get over the death of his wife. Plot point 1. Alfie Allen, a man with the most punchable face in the world, kills that dog. Plot point 2. John Wick goes after him for revenge. Plot point 3. Event causes an event, causes another event. That's plot. If you had a story where John Wick gets a dog to get over his wife and just has a dog for 2 hours, that isn't a plot because nothing bigger happens. The events don't go anywhere. Now, it's admittedly, hanging out with Keanu Reeves and a dog for 2 hours does sound amazing, but if you're writing an action film, we need things to escalate. Think of your favorite episode of television. It can be comedy, drama, horror, RuPaul's Drag Race, whatever. It starts small, but then things start to build. Something goes wrong. Jokes get funnier. Things get scarier, more tense. Think of a video game. Starts off easy and then gets harder and harder and tenser, and you, as the watcher or the player or the reader, get more tense with them. That's plot. Picture a roller coaster, starting slow, then rattling higher and higher, adrenaline rising before the final plunge. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I promised you a step by step, a plug and play, easy as anything way to approach a plot. So here we go. All stories start with an introduction. Now, I don't mean a handshake or a how are you. What I mean is each story starts off by showing us the who, the what, and the where. It shows us who our main character is. It shows us where they live, what their normal life is like. In Fast and the Furious, Paul Walker's character is a cop who specializes in high-speed crimes. In Harry Potter is a kid who lives under the stairs. His life is awful. Okay. In Batman, Bruce Wayne is the son of billionaires Thomas and Martha Wayne. Now, the introduction sets the stage. It shows us, when in history your story is set. It shows us maybe the type of story, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or superhero or whatever, but we never just stick with the introduction, okay? Something has to happen to change up the main character's life. So as soon as you have that sort of baseline established, we now get to the complication. The complication is an event that sends your character's life in a new direction. Now, this direction can be good or bad. Finding out you're a wizard, good complication. Finding out Wizard Hitler wants to kill you, bad complication. Okay? For example, in Iron Man, Tony Stark, when we meet him, he is a billionaire weapons dealer, best life in the world, private jet, really nice suit. We might have watched 2 hours of that film, but something changes to make his life more interesting. He is captured by terrorists, he is kept in a cave, and he decides he needs to break out. This is really important. Your story will come not just from the complication, but from your character trying to deal with it. Okay? Now, what kind of complication you have depends on the story. Okay, if your story is a secondary school or high school story, then maybe it is a new girl moves into the class and our main character develops a crush on them, and suddenly the story becomes about whether they're going to tell them they like them or not. If your story is spies and secret agents, maybe a piece of technology has been stolen by the bad guys and the hero has to get it back. But this complication pushes your hero to start making choices. Now, we'll get into these important choices later when we talk about character, but right now, introduction, complication. Your hero tries to deal with the complication. Now, if they deal with the complication immediately, your story is going to be a page long. So maybe they realize they can't fix the complication until they get 2 or 3 other things, right? That's a very video game thing. You collect the 3 crystals to whatever. Maybe they solve the complication, but it reveals a bigger complication. So they defeat one villain only to find out that villain was working for somebody else, right? Maybe the character plucks up the courage to speak to their crush and finds out their crush has started dating the person bullying them, okay? Awkward, terrible, complicated. These complications build up and build up and build up until we get to our climax. Now, the climax is the most important bit of the story. It's the most exciting bit of the story. All your complications, all your different bits and pieces have been building to this moment. If you think about the roller coaster, it's that moment just before you plunge, okay? Frantically holding onto your glasses so they don't come off and kill somebody. But the climax is the moment where all the excitement and tension pays off. It's the bit where the hero faces the final complication, or the bit where they stop running from the complication, or the bit where it comes down to hero and villain facing off against each other. Now, after this climactic moment, what you get is the resolution. The resolution is the dust settling. It's the moment where we see who's still alive, who's changed, who's ended up with who, excuse me, who won, who lost, and how everybody is different. So if you think about our television shows, Take an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine will start with an introduction. Usually this is like a series of jokes, establishing people's characters. Jake is a good detective. Amy's kind of uptight. Terry loves yogurt. And then the characters will be given a case to deal with. And this case is usually the complication. It forces our characters to have to do different things, to try and achieve things, to try and win, try and lose. This will all build up to a really big moment. And then afterwards, we talk about the lessons we learned and whatever. Every story has these. And having these steps in your head means you have the shape of your story before you start writing. This is crucial. I used to teach Leaving Cert years ago when I had more tidy hair. Seriously, I meant to go for a haircut between previous lockdowns and I didn't, and this is what happens. Um, but the biggest problem I saw in my students' work is they'd start writing a story and they get really into it, and then they'd realize they had no idea where they were going. If you take a moment to think of these 4 points beforehand, you'll never get lost in your story. Now, the other thing is, make sure you think of the solution for the complication before you start writing. Otherwise, you will invent a complication the main character and you have no idea how to fix, and then you cannot end your story. You'll get students who start their story with "John died," and you're like, "Cool." And then what happened? And the student goes, "Oh." And then you either get very existential or you have to go back and rewrite your story so John survives. Just give it a little bit of thought before you start. So with that in mind, here's your first writing exercise. I'm going to give you a complication. This is your thing that shows up in a story to make life more difficult and more exciting for the main character. You're going to provide everything else. You're just going to bullet point it, but I want you to come up with the introduction, the who, the when, the where, how they deal with this complication, what happens next, what the climax is, and the resolution, how the dust settles. Now, you're not writing this story, you're just bullet pointing it out. This is your little cheat sheet before you write the full entire story. So, your complication is your main character, whoever they are, wherever they're from, will find that out in your introduction. They have to stay in a haunted house for one night to claim €1,000,000. So whoever you invent has to go through that. What they do when they get in there is up to you. How the story climaxes is up to you. How the story resolves, whether they get their money or not, whether they donate it to charity, whether they dig up the corpse of the ghost who was haunting them and use the money to get revenge, that's all on you. All we know is that's the complication. Pause the video. I'll wait. I'm excited to see what you come up with. And we're back. Now, how did we find that? Again, I can't hear you. This is a pre-record. But talk among yourselves. Trade notes. Talk about what you found difficult and what you found easy. Because I think if you have this little bit of a map, it makes things easier to know where you're going. And once you have an idea of how to build that plot, you can start messing with that structure. Because that's the thing. This is how every film and TV show works. The first thing you do when writing a TV show, aside from buying yourself a celebratory burrito because selling a TV show is really hard, is they lay out a numbered list of all the plot points. Everyone gets in a room with a big whiteboard and they make a list of every single plot point across the first season of the TV show. And then they divide up those plot points into episodes. So you might have the first 10 plot points and you take that and go, that's episode 1, that's episode 2, that's episode 3. And sometimes what people will do will go, that's a little bit too exciting for the first episode. Let's move that to episode 2. Or actually, I think we need to meet this character earlier. Let's move them to the end, like Lego, okay? So like, if you make this list of plot points beforehand, you can do this as well. You can chop and change, you can move exciting moments around to hook in your audience. For example, James Bond films always start with an action sequence. That's to grab you and make it exciting. Then after the action sequence is done and you're properly hooked, they throttle back a little bit and do some more explaining. That is putting the complication before the introduction. Or Deadpool and Deadpool 2, which both start with a big scene that technically happens much later in the film, but they wanted to give you a glimpse of it first, so you buy in. Or, probably most famously, Marvel movies, which put a complication in the end credits as like a post-credit scene to make you really excited for the next movie. So again, once you know the basics, you can mess around. Once you know the rules, you can break them. So here's your final challenge for this section. I want you to start writing the story that you bullet pointed out, but I want you to start complication first. Start close to the action. A frightening bit, a glimpse of the monster, whatever. Start close to the bone. Just do the complication, let's say a page, and then jump back and start the story from the introduction. Then, if you want, keep writing, see where the story goes. See if you can do one page per complication scene, and then one page for the introduction, the proper start of the story. Cool. Pause the video. I'll wait, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with. Okay, so now that we have an idea of how our basic plots work, we can start expanding outwards and start thinking a little more about who the plot is happening to. So let's get into the next section, which talks about character. Okay, so in section one, we talked about plot, but plot is only interesting when it's happening to people. A boring character can completely kill the most exciting plot. It's like a road trip. The scenery doesn't matter if you can't stand the other person in the car. And this is doubly important when it comes to plot because when you're building your step by step, this happened because of this, all of that is fueled by a character's decisions. The villain kills the hero's parents, so the hero decides she wants revenge. That isn't an automatic choice, that's part of her character. A different character might decide that she's actually going to go on the run for the rest of her life instead. Maybe another character's going to be like, I really like my parents, so whatever. I remember seeing a video of a 4-year-old at Disneyland, and they reach the part of the show where Darth Vader comes out, and all the kids are supposed to boo and hiss, and this little girl pulled her hand out of her mom's hand and ran towards Darth Vader and knelt, offering up her toy lightsaber like she was looking for work experience. People are different. People will react to plot elements differently, and that makes your story exciting because it makes it unpredictable. So how do we build a good character? Well, as I said, I'm all about giving the easy blueprint. So here is your checklist for all the things you need to know about your character before you start writing. First things first, we need to know what your character wants. This gives you your plot. Your main character is trying to get something. Now, what that is up to you. They want to get the girl, they want to avenge their parents, they want to become president, they want to kill the president, they want to break out of prison. This is your objective marker in a video game. It points you where the character is trying to go. And when you're trying to string plot events together, it's a really useful thing to know because each plot event is like a crossroads, and your character is going to take the road that gets them closer to where they want to be. Sometimes realizing what this thing is your complication. New boy joins the football team and a rivalry begins. New teacher starts in the school and starts dating the main character's mother, and now he must die. Complicated. But now that we know what your character wants, we need to know why they want it. This is also called motivation, if we're being fancy, and we always are. People need a reason for doing stuff, otherwise what's the point? I'm the good guy because I'm the good guy isn't very interesting and will also make your story really short. Giving your character a backstory and a reason for the choices they make will make your story longer and more complicated. And also, and this is really important, give the reader reasons to like your character and root for them. This is the game. This is the job. Your goal as a writer is to make all those random people out there in the world who have never met you and don't care about you and don't owe you anything, like the fake people you have made up on the page. It sounds really stupid when you say it like that. I need other people to enjoy my imaginary friends. And yet, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've watched Line of Duty or Riverdale or Bake Off, and you have liked certain characters and not liked others. You've wanted certain characters to get what they want, and you've wanted other characters to suffer, and there are other characters you just didn't care about at all. And these feelings that you had were created and invented and manipulated by writers, even on reality TV shows. Actually, especially on reality TV shows, because they edit reality TV shows to make them into stories where one person is the villain and one person is the hero. There are couples you root for on Love Island. There are contestants who get to have a sob story on RuPaul's Drag Race. There are people who get more of the limelight than others. All of that is edited and shaped to make you care about other people. And one of the easiest ways to make you like a character is to give them a good reason for doing what they're doing. That's why parents get murdered so often in things. It's so the main character gets this turbo boost towards wanting to face the bad guy. But motivation isn't enough by itself. We need one more thing: a flaw. I am allergic to perfect people, people who never get out of breath, and people who never look disheveled, and are never stuck for words, and people who never lose their keys, and people who seem great all the time. And it's the same with characters. If your character is perfect, they're boring. They're just going to waltz from plot point to plot point without a care in the world. And without flaws, without difficulty, it's like playing a video game on easy mode. Flawed people are interesting. They lose their temper. They make mistakes. They make poor choices. And we as the audience love poor choices because those poor choices are entertaining. Falling for the bad boy. Sneaking out so you can challenge your rival to a knife fight in a car park at 4 a.m. because she keyed your car the night before. Deciding to take on a whole army by yourself because you put on a magical gem and now you're drunk with power. All these things are bad choices, but they make great television. Especially because you're the writer of this story. And when you're designing a flaw for a character, you can choose a flaw that will make the story more exciting. You can choose a flaw and make sure the story forces the character to face that flaw. Because the one thing audiences love more than flawed characters is seeing characters face their flaw and beat them. Because that's what we all want to do ourselves, is face the thing that makes us scared or makes us weak and defeat it. Maybe your character is really shy, but their crushes enter the school play, and if your character sucks it up in auditions, they'll get to be the Romeo to their Juliet. Maybe your character swore they would never investigate another murder after getting nearly killed by the Ipswich Strangler in 1993, but now their husband has been kidnapped and they're the only one who can solve the case. Either way, it's going to be stressful, and stressful means exciting. Let me give you an example. In my Knights of the Borrowed Dark novels, my main character Denizen, this like skeptical, sharp, sarcastic 13-year-old from Mayo, gets recruited into an organization called the Knights of the Borrowed Dark, an organization that protects the world from shape-shifting monsters called Tenebrous. Now, for any other teenager, this would be cool. You get a sword, you get to learn to fight. The thing is, Denizen's had a crap life. He lost his parents a long time ago, and he has no idea what happened to them. And since then, he's learned not to trust anybody or anything because the next moment they might be gone. So the idea of risking his life for other people just doesn't interest him. This is his flaw. Until one night, when he's being chased by a Tenebrous, a twisted woman in white with teeth like scissors and a howl like a rat in a blender, and he tries to take a shortcut through someone's garden. and he runs into a little 3-year-old girl just snuck outside to get her teddy. And the woman in white follows Denizen in and stops. She looks between the little girl and Denizen. She's a predator. It's a buffet. They always go for the weakest target. And Denizen suddenly realizes that he could run. The monster is distracted. He could just leave. Nobody would know. He doesn't know anybody anything, right? And if he does that, that little kid will vanish and nobody will ever know what happened. Just like Denizen's parents. And Denizen realizes that he's going to stay because he never wants anybody to feel the way he's had to his entire life. So he draws his sword and charges. That's your motivation. You make a character face up against their flaw and they beat it, and that allows them to get closer to what they want. So here is your next exercise. I want you to write a very, very short paragraph about a character. You're going to make up a character from scratch. Now, we don't need to get into description or what they look like, anything like that. Just a couple of bullet points. What their name is, what they want, why they want it, and what's their flaw. I'll see you in section 3. Okay, so now we have a chunk of a person to build around. We know what they want, we know where they're going, we know what's wrong with them. Now we can start building things out a little bit, because I know what you're thinking. These are all bullet points, Dave. That doesn't get me to my page count, so my teacher doesn't murder me. And you're right. So details are important, but details come from knowing those few base facts around your character. They're the foundation on which you build everything else. So let's really quickly just spin up a character to use. Frank. Frank is 24. He is a bouncer in a small town who wants to get the hell out of there and make something of himself because his whole life he's been told he never will. He is a bouncer with a bad temper and a tendency to mouth off when he shouldn't. So there we go. We have a person, we have a desire to do something, we have a motivation to do that thing, and we have a flaw or a problem. That's a solid start, but we have to build around that now with description. And I think that's what some people find off-putting around writing because they don't know how much description to put in, they don't know how to craft good description, they don't know which details are the right details or the clever details. So let's start off by not worrying about any of that whatsoever. I want you to take 10 minutes of class time or do it as homework, whatever your teacher wants, and write out 10 sentences describing Frank. Now, here are our guidelines. Don't be afraid to be obvious. Like, he's a bouncer. He is probably large, okay? Don't be afraid to be specific. He is 6'5". He is 300 pounds. He always wears a Led Zeppelin t-shirt that's starting to come apart under the armpits. Don't be afraid to be poetic. Frank had a face the colour of uncooked ham, and he looked like ham as well. A big, meaty hog of a man, always just about 2 seconds away from violence. Don't be afraid to do research. Take out your phone, Google bouncer, look at the photos that crop up, look at actors you like, look at pictures of bouncers, think about people you know, but change the name so you don't get sued. That's your challenge. 10 sentences. Pause the video. I'll wait. Okay, you done? Great. Now, here's the thing. So much of writing is just practice. I don't have to think too hard about describing stuff because I do it all the time. And so those muscles, the only muscles I possess, are well trained. These 10 sentences were just you stretching, getting your eye in, getting a sense of the character before you really go to work. Have a read back over your 10 sentences and underline 5 of them that you think are pretty good. Leave out any that maybe aren't that great or are a little repetitious or are boring. Basically, play description Jenga. Take away everything that doesn't work and leave the essentials. Because you spent a while thinking about Frank now, so you know him a little better. And this is sort of the source of good writing. I wouldn't worry too much about this when it comes to writing in exams, although you certainly don't want to introduce a character, spend 4 pages describing them, and not have them do anything. But if you want to stand out in terms of writing competitions or getting a book published, it is often about what you leave out as much as what you put in. I have a character in my Knights of the Borrowed Dark books called Simon. And when I was first describing Simon, I had no idea what he really looked like. So I sort of like thought about it and I meandered and I came up with different ideas and I was imagining someone tall and skinny and gangly and his clothes kind of don't fit him and he's got kind of floppy black hair. And after I'd done all that thinking, the last line I finished with was, he looks like a crow in a scarf. And that really stuck with me. I was like, oh, he looks like a crow in a scarf. And when I went back to edit the book, I ended up removing most of the long descriptions I given Simon because I don't know what you have in your head when you hear the phrase crow in a scarf. I don't know whether you think that means a long nose or tall and skinny or like long hair, but you look like a crow in a scarf. And you can kind of do the rest of the work yourself. But I needed to do that work first. I needed to come up with all those different descriptions so I could realize which ones I could take away. I needed to build the Jenga tower before I started dismantling it. So now that you've chosen your 5 sort of strong descriptive lines, you can add to that if you want. You can add in a 6th or a 7th. That's totally fine. The next thing your character needs is a voice. This is how the character thinks and talks. Because everybody has a unique voice. Not just the sound, but the words people choose to use, the way they use them, the volume and the cadence and the rhythm. Now, again, you already know this. Every student in the world has sat around and laughed at one of their teacher's particular catchphrase or done impressions of the way they say certain words. I mean, obviously, you students have never done that. You would never. Try and imagine, right? Because when you spend time with somebody, when you're around somebody, you begin to notice odd little things about the way they talk. Or you notice that some people will use certain words and other people won't. So, for example, I used to live in Egypt, as you could tell my amazing tan. And when I was over there, the local librarian was really confused by the Irish way that I spoke. Now, we both spoke English, but I had all these little Irishisms in my voice that he didn't quite get. And so at one point, because like this is the thing, Irish people speak slightly differently. We have certain words that we use that other countries don't. Most of the rest of the world does not say class to mean great, but Irish people do. Most people in the rest of the world don't say a quarter to the way that we do, okay? And one word that we use that other people don't is grand, okay? Obviously, you guys are all familiar with that. Grand. It means like, yeah, fine, good, grand, whatever. Now, one day, the local librarian is like, Mr. David, I have a question. I'm like, sure. And he's like, every day you come in and I ask you how you are, and you say, I'm grand. Yeah. But I looked up the word grand in the dictionary, Mr. David, and it means large and majestic. And I was like, and? How dare you? So the fact that if you give a character those words and they say grand and class, we're immediately going to think of them as Irish, okay? So you have to think about when the character talks, how you put in these little word choices that make it sound like them and nobody else, okay? So like, what kind of things does Frank say? Why does he say them? What does he sound like? Does his way of speaking reflect where he grew up, or does it reflect him trying to get away from where he grew up? Does he have a phrase of his dad's he says all the time? Does he have a phrase of his mom's he says all the time? How do all these things reflect who he actually is? And this might seem like a small thing, like you could have Frank be a bouncer who is extremely well read, so he uses all of these like incredibly long and posh words, or you could have him speak in mostly grunts. Both of those are correct, but Each of them gives a slightly different flavour as to what kind of a person and what kind of bouncer he is. I remember being at a party once in college when a fight broke out. Two lads kicking lumps out of each other before this huge elephant of a man grabbed them both by the scruff of the neck and said, "Hello, could you stop that please? I'm trying to have a wee dance in the corner and you're kind of killing the mood." And we were all like, why does this huge man have the voice of a tiny elven princess? But all of that is great detail and speaks to character. Maybe Frank was picked on in school because of his voice, and that's why he became huge and tough and terrifying. Well, that's suddenly even more motivation for him to leave his hometown. All these little details are useful. They're all flavor. It's like when you're drawing a picture and every new line you add, every little bit of shading, every little bit of color makes it appear more rich and more real. Now, the last thing we need for your character to be interesting is internal conflict. This is a very posh phrase, but it kind of comes back to our perfect note from earlier. We don't like perfect and we don't like certain. Somebody who has all the answers from day one is boring. Great characters suffer from internal conflict. They don't know what they want, or they don't know how to get what they want. They want the thing, but they're afraid of the thing. They want the thing, but they're afraid of what happens when they get it. Position your character between hard choices. This is something you see in superhero stuff all the time, where the main character has powers, wants to help people, but also really wants a normal life and really wants the chance to be with the person that they love, or just to be normal, or to like be happy as opposed to risking their life all the time. If you put a character in between these two choices, they are not sure which one to choose. And that indecision is interesting and exciting. They're kind of bouncing around between the two like a bee in a jar. It allows us to relate to these characters because we all have hard choices to make as well. And it also gives us a reason to keep reading because we want to know where they end up. Like, maybe Frank wants to get out of the small town, but if he does, he leaves his little sister behind and she doesn't really have anybody else. Maybe he gets offered a job being the muscle for like the local gang and he's excited, but he's also nervous that once he gets in with these guys, he's never going to be able to get out. Either way, it's complicated, which makes it interesting and makes it entertaining. So, I've given you kind of a roadmap on how to develop these characters, kind of a checklist to work your way through. So take that first character log line and start building it out. Write a scene with your main character getting a takeaway or walking to work or getting interviewed by the police about a crime they may or may not have been a part of. But now that you have this log line, this basis of the character, start like giving them a scene where we get to see some description, we get to see some dialogue, they have a voice, we get to see what they want, and we get to see them trying to get it. I guarantee you it will be easier to write now that you know them a little better. Folks, this brings us to the end of the writing workshop. Thank you so much to your teachers. Thank you to the Creative Schools program for setting all this up. And most of all, thank you for watching. I hope that you found the lessons within it useful. And I'm just going to finish up by giving you some very quick shout outs and recommendations. If you like YA about death, sword fights, ill-advised crushes on girls who may or may not be monsters, and terrifying women in white eating light bulbs, check out my Knights of the Borrowed Dark trilogy, which are actually on the junior cert, so technically this all counts as studying. If you're a sci-fi fan, check out my Doctor Who collections, 12 Angels Weeping and the Wintertime Paradox. And you can take a look at my website, daverudden.com, for more videos and interviews and writing guides and a bunch of other nonsense. If you enjoyed this video and want to book or find more specific workshops, I teach how to write TV, how to write fantasy, how to write horror. I teach creative writing through Dungeons and Dragons because I'm a huge nerd. I do residencies and master classes, and you can watch me be bad at games on Twitch. I also do live events and Q&As, so if you had any questions you wanted to ask, fire them politely at your teacher and I'll record a short video back. To finish this video and to give you an example of what following all these rules gives you as a finished product, here's a short extract from one of the stories I've written, Christmas with the Plasmavores. I hope you enjoy it. Christmas with the Plasmavores. It is a French name, said Henry Plasmavore, and smiled so widely you could see every tooth in his head. Very common. Very normal, added Madeline Plasmavore. She was smiling too, but she had no teeth at all. Very human and normal. They filled the doorway of the Sullivan home like jelly in a mould, a pair of squat, fleshy rectangles in identical black button-up coats. Henry had a red scarf crimping the dead white skin of his neck. A beret had deflated on Madeline's scalp. Other than that, it was surprisingly difficult to tell them apart. Catherine disliked them on sight. This was not an uncommon reaction for Catherine. It wasn't that she had anything against people on principle, but she had simply decided 6 months ago that she had met enough of them and didn't need to meet any more. There was a quota. She had reached it. Her father had tried to explain to her that there wasn't a quota, actually, and even if there was, she couldn't have reached it because she was 9. This was just one of the many things on which Catherine and her father did not see eye to eye. And your car broke down? Morris Sullivan was small for a dad. He dressed in oversized cardigans even in summer, and his receding hair stuck up in tufts as if waving for help. Morris needed help with a lot of things. He had to be reminded to take his anxiety medicine. He sometimes worked so hard he forgot to eat, and Catherine had to remind him to do that too. The only reason there was a stubby little Christmas tree in the corner was because Catherine had reminded him that it was Christmas, and she wished she'd had the presence of mind to also remind him that you didn't open the door to strange people at midnight on Christmas Eve. But now he had, and the Plasmavores loomed over them both like the twin halves of a Venus flytrap about to snap shut. Engine trouble, Henry Plasmavore said. His voice was flat and nasal, more like a photocopy of a voice than the real thing. Isn't that right, Madeline? It is right, Henry. Madeline's voice was a soft and rustling whisper that sharpened without warning on certain words, like finding thorns in dry grass. Morris peered at the strangers. I'm not much of a mechanic, I'm afraid, but if you'd like to come in and wait with us while you call someone. Is it just the two of you? The question spilled out, languid as a cat, and Morris froze like prey. Yes. Catherine's mother passed away 6 months ago. A car accident. He always said it in the same way, a single, toneless blurt, like someone reciting a phone number. That was how Catherine said it as well. It was a bit like a phone number when you thought about it. Something you had to hand out to people so they knew how to talk to you. The Plasmavores' smiles widened. How unfortunate. They didn't say it at the same time. That would have been creepy. Instead, they spoke slightly out of time with each other, which was worse. Dad. The Plasmavores' eyes lowered. Catherine ducked further behind Morris's leg. Yes, Catherine? She could say something. She should say something. There was something off about the Plasmavores. Something artificial. Their eyes glittered without reflecting the light. Their skin had a peculiar shine like fingernails or teeth. And they hadn't seemed sad to hear that Mam was gone. That in itself wasn't alarming. Catherine didn't require people to be sad on her behalf. It hadn't been their loss. If she was being honest, most of the time, she didn't require other people at all. But the Plasmavores had seemed amused. She should say something. Morris would listen. Most adults didn't. They said things like, not now, or shh, the grown-ups are talking. This was especially true when it came to Catherine, who liked sharing facts about scorpions and horror movies and planning what to do in the event of a zombie apocalypse. She had it on good authority from the kids in her class that liking these things made her weird, which was fine, because in Catherine's opinion, not planning for a zombie apocalypse made you an idiot. Morris wasn't a perfect dad. He forgot things. He burned dinners. Sometimes Catherine felt like she was parenting him. But he never called her weird. Morris looked down at her, his eyes kind and a little weary. Is everything all right? Catherine forced a smile. Yes, Dad. Henry Plasmavore grinned down at her. Marvellous, he purred. What a sweet child. Oh, Catherine's not sweet, Morris said. She's Catherine. All children are sweet, said Madeline Plasmavore, if you get the seasoning right. Thank you.